G'day legends, how's it going? I hope that you are having a fantastic day and a fantastic midweek. Now I know there is a theory floating around that every time I travel, everything starts to fall apart, and I've got bad news. I'm going away for a couple of days with my partner for her birthday this weekend, so I will miss 1 or 2 days, so strap in. But I will take the necessary equipment needed if something large does happen. Now, today, as always, it's no different. A lot has happened, and we need to talk about a lot of things. So in no particular order, but we will look at the maps. We will see where things are changing and what that may mean then down the line as these areas are moving or maybe getting enveloped. And we need to look at an area of which we have been pointing at geolocations and pointing at different maps that hasn't changed now for months, and today it has started changing. We also need to look at satellite imagery, videos and claims around a number of fighter and bomber aircraft, and that will then be a step from what we spoke about yesterday. I want to look at a North Korean weapon system that we've seen for the first time captured by a Ukrainian drone on a video image in Russia, and I want to talk about that link between North Korea and Russia as well. I want to talk at length about propaganda, and propaganda that is specifically aimed at those running for the presidential election. And I see this very differently, but in very concerning as well, because I don't think the propaganda is as obvious as some may think as well. And what I always say is just online with anything, just be mindful. And I'm not just meaning the election, I'm meaning with everything from independents like myself through to your multi-billion-dollar behemoth media. There are agendas at play. You don't know where all the funding is at play. Even just personal agenda being pushed too. Just be careful online, please. We need to look at a Ukrainian Special Operations Forces video for recruitment on partisan warfare as well, and I missed that in yesterday's video, and I want to talk about what the Finnish president has said in an interview about negotiations and peace and how that has caused quite a stir. I want to look back at some reactions to this, of which I disagree with, but it's an interesting point and perspective to put forward. I want to line this up with some maps as well. So, Alexander Stub, who's 56, so a reasonable age for a leader, has been the president of the Republic of Finland since March. Finland has been a huge supporter of Ukraine, and so has Mr. Stub. He was asked by Le Monde, how do you judge the wish expressed by the Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky to see Russia participate in a future peace summit? He says Zelensky is playing his cards right. From the beginning, he wanted to have the initiative in a discussion process. The ball is now in Russia's court. Ukraine and Zelensky are in a much stronger position than 2 months ago. They are receiving the equipment and budgets necessary to maintain their positions. We're no longer in the situation of near despair that we're in the spring with the blocking of American aid and Europe's difficulties in delivering the equipment. Now, I vehemently disagree with this, and I disagree with the next part of this as well. There are parts that Ukraine is in a better situation than months ago. There are parts that are worse, but those parts that even are better actually show the other side is actually then worse. So there's a few things to talk about here. Let's talk about the main thing that has been improved by this, and he speaks about the American aid, is the ammunition shortage that caused chaos on the front line. There was no shells, no mortars, no rounds, bloody everywhere. It was being rationed out. Now, that has been fixed to a large degree, not completely, but it has been fixed to a large degree. And what do we see on the front line? What has changed? Not actually that much. We continue to see that Russia is continually moving. That actually shows the other side, the things that have got worse are even then worse than before, that wasn't then the sole issue. And Europe's difficulties in delivering equipment to Kyiv, okay, that still exists, we know, because the F-16s are not in play yet, as well as an amount of other things. But there are new difficulties that have come forward, say with energy, not only Russia striking energy facilities, but due to some Ukrainian decisions to shut off some energy through to then Eastern Europe not playing ball on that and threatening energy and fuel back into Ukraine as well. So as some have been fixed, it's shown that the other problems are worse, say for manpower and recruitment and mobilization of men, because there we still see that move. He says, There is no Russian breakthrough either. Russia is not advancing according to our intelligence. Well, Mr. Stubbs, I'm sorry, but if your intelligence is telling you that Russia is not advancing, you need to walk into whoever your intelligence agency is and sack every single person from the one making coffees to the ones pulling the trigger. Because look at any map, look at any geolocation, Russia is advancing on the battlefield. And as far as breakthrough, okay, it depends what you classify as a breakthrough. But after seeing a stagnant front line for over a year, the movement over a few months of, I think it's about 28 kilometres, 26 kilometres through to Prohez, that is a large movement and could be considered, depending how you look at it, but I'll give you the benefit of the doubt, but could be considered a breakthrough as the amount of defensive lines this has moved through. And this also says, and its losses are even greater than before. This is something that we hear so much, that according to numbers, according to media, according to people, the Russian losses are between 3 and I've heard 15 times the Ukrainian losses. And this doesn't add up to me and what I'm seeing. Now, what we know is from recent interviews at the front and people I've spoken to and what mainstream reporting, Russia has the initiative on the amount of drones. We know they've got the initiative on the amount of artillery, and Zelensky has said this week that Russia is dropping 800 FABs a week, which I classify in artillery and are incredibly, incredibly powerful. Now, I think the idea that Russia is taking to the factor of 10 times the casualties when we know most people in this war are killed by artillery and or drones, I think that pops up a few red flags there straight off the back. Now, I would presume Russia is taking more because they are on the offensive, but is it that much more when you've got such an overmatch in other areas? I struggle to believe so. And just while we're on that 800 FABs a week, if the F-16's coming in, the 6 to 10 of them that are coming with 6 to 10 pilots, maybe 20 platforms that are coming in, if they can't stop the carriers of these FABs, the front line will continue moving. If they can't make a dint in this, it is really going to be difficult. An F-16 can shoot down all the long-range cruise missiles at once, but the front line, if those FABs can't be stopped, it's going to create more and more issues into the future, and that will keep crawling forwards. Putin thought the West would get tired of the war. He thought he could wait for the American elections, but he was wrong. Well, we don't know yet, mate, for the American elections, and the Western officials and companies may not be tired of the war, but I think a lot of civilians are. I think if you walk down the street in Germany or America or Australia or New Zealand or whatever, and you just ask someone, look, what do you think of the war? I think a lot of people would go, after 2.5 years, and we see Russia advancing, it might be time to look at something else. It's incredibly expensive, and not only expensive in money, but it's incredibly expensive in human cost of this as well. I think that's how a lot of people are feeling. And remember, we're in our own sort of echo chamber here, because if you're watching daily updates on this, you're far more involved than just the average person. He's asked, it is already time to talk about negotiations, or is it time, to talk about negotiations or even territorial concessions on the part of Ukraine? He says we must distinguish between a possible discussion process, which is not an end in itself, and peace. Starting negotiations does not mean that you are going to make concessions. Zelensky needs 4 elements for this process to be successful. The first is territories currently occupied by Russia, and this will be his sole decision. Second, Ukraine needs security guarantees, and this is where we can help through bilateral agreements for NATO and the EU. Third, justice is needed to prosecute Russian war criminals. Finally, Zelensky needs support for the reconstruction of his territory. Now, what I will say here is if you come to a peace conference right here and now, Russia has the initiative on the front line. I think everyone knows currently they've got this initiative. That is going to be, in many cases, Russia calling the shots on this. And Russia will not sign a negotiation now. Realistically, if you want the guns to fall silent this year with what we're seeing, if you start this at no territorial concession, security guarantees, parts of NATO and the EU, the arrest of Russian officials, and I'm guessing when we talk about reconstruction of of Ukraine, we're talking about reparations from Russia. Why would Russia agree to any of that if they've now got the initiative on the front line and are advancing in almost all directions of which they are pushing? Why would they come to the negotiation table on that? It's a very high starting point for Ukraine, who is moving backwards on the front line over then the past year, who has severe problems with manpower, and I don't really see how that can be fixed. Tanks and guns and ammunition, that's a lot easier to fix than morale and motivation and men. What is Russia getting out of that negotiation other than an end then to the war? But I want to speak on something maybe more than here, on why would Russia negotiate at this point in time. So we have seen that Kyiv and Zelensky and all the officials have been so firm, unwavering, that there will be no negotiations, no concessions, no nothing. And in the past, say, 4 weeks, their tune towards negotiations has changed dramatically. Now, I'm going to speak from the perspective of if I was a Russian official or general seeing this. What it would show me is for 2.5 years, you have been unwavering that it's no negotiation, military victory, this. Suddenly there is a light switch shift that, we want you to come to a peace conference, this and that. It would be a sign to me that, okay, the situation must be desperate. They must be really burnt out, and they must think a victory for us is at this point more likely than not. So at that point, you have one of two decisions. You can either continue the fight, of which you're thinking, well, they must be in a desperate situation if they want to negotiate, or you go, well, they're in a desperate situation, we'll come to the table because we don't want to continue fighting either, but the terms of this negotiation will then be in our favour because the situation there must be fairly desperate. That is how I would see this if I was getting presented with this at the time as one of those negotiators. As I've said, if Ukraine want these parts as far as justice, security guarantees, territories, reconstruction, it needs to start with military victory on the front line. The Finnish president is convinced that for peace to be achieved, Russia must withdraw its troops from Ukraine, but this cannot be seen as a precondition, saying we must convince the global south that what Russia is doing is imperialism. It's in their interest to end this conflict. Now, it is not guaranteed that the powerful countries in the global south can influence Russia enough to end the conflict. With what is happening between Israel and Gaza and Israel and Lebanon, this has convinced a lot in the global south that there's so much hypocrisy around what Russia do and get away with and what other countries do and get away with. And we can see these through the maps that I am then about to show you. Now, I'm not saying that this is then right or wrong. I'm saying this is how billions upon billions of people, including people in the West, then see this. And this is very obvious if we go across. This is the peace communique at the last peace conference. We see that the global south, it failed to get the global south together or attend or sign then the final statement in here. The big ones, really, we're looking at India and Indonesia. And of course, China didn't attend because it was not on the terms of which they said. Now, what we need to do is line this up then with the countries that voted at the UN on a humanitarian truce in Gaza. So we can see a very similar overlay of countries here. Now, I know I've shown these maps before, but we'll have then a look at the countries that have then sanctioned Russia. Again, you can see a very interesting overlay of nations here. Not 100%, but close enough. Then we can look at the countries that are then arming Ukraine here as well. Tends to line up. And another interesting one, and something for another day, is we can actually line this up with countries that then are actually meeting replacement rate as well. And of course, Russia and China are not meeting it here, but are tying economies very, very tightly to countries that then are. So let's continue on this. And I've spoken before that what is happening in Israel and Gaza and Lebanon is having huge effects in this war as well, and how people then see the messaging towards this war. Everything from people using the word genocide through to then who can participate at the Olympics. It's being used in the informational space massively. Saying if Chinese leader Xi Jinping wanted to stop the war, he would call Vladimir Putin and say enough. Again, I'm not convinced that China has enough pull to actually do that on Russia. Unsure. We also know China and Brazil have had then their plan to end the war as well. That is vastly different in many ways, vastly similar in many ways around security of energy and nuclear and weapons of mass destruction as well, but to what Ukraine and the West say is acceptable. Recent statements on peace plans and negotiations with Russia. Ukraine is preparing a clear and detailed plan to end the war, expected to be ready this year. Ukraine aims to hold the second peace summit by the end of 2024. What I'm saying is, if it goes in with what the Finnish president has said here of territorial, all territories back, all these security guarantees, NATO, EU, justice of the Russian leaders, as well as reconstruction, I'm presuming from reparations, that's not going to end in the guns fall silent, and I don't believe Russia would attend if that's where that is then starting. I think there's a long way opposed in this, but we need to look at the idea of Russia running out of weapons here too. So one of Ukraine's most known journalists has then put this on Twitter, Alexander Stub, so in response to the Finnish president. It's a dangerous idea to promote peace talks with Russia now, and to say that time has come for Ukraine is now in a much better position than early 2024. The time has not come, and Russia is not seriously seeking peace and coexistence with sovereign, independent Ukraine. They still believe they can bleed Ukraine dry and are treated to the point of collapse, both in the military and at the home front. They keep throwing immense resources, and they hope the Ukrainian front can begin falling down in Donbass before they absolutely run out of their capacity to fight the war the way they do. Now, in this, what this is doing is this is presuming, though, that Ukraine also is not depleted of a lot of systems and men as well. Russia is depleting those resources, but Ukraine is also depleting them too. And if you listen to or watch anything with guys at the front line, they will say that we don't have the guys, we're still struggling on a lot of this. Russian resources available for a large-scale war, largely based on old Soviet stocks, have their limits, and the Kremlin knows it. That said, with a lot of stuff, they're still building new things, and this gets completely turned around, at least the time limits on this, if a third party starts supplying things, which will lead into we're seeing North Korean armoured vehicles arrive and the potential of Russia to buy Chinese stuff. They know that in the second half of 2025, bottomless Soviet depots will largely run empty. That's still a long, long way away. And they'll have to rely solely on their own production and supplies from their totalitarian buddies, which cover only about 20% of Russia's battlefield losses. That said, it depends what losses you're looking at, as well as is it presuming Russia will be at the same tempo this year. They may just go full defensive next year and meet that replacement and pull old stuff out of storage. And I found this very interesting part then about tanks. We're not going to go too deep into it, but this thread from Hi Marced, this thread aims to provide some open source and reputable facts about Russian pre-war storage and pre-war tank stockpiles. Now, one thing I will say, I think too many people are focused on the tanks in this war. If tanks were going to change the war, the Leopards, the Abrams, the T-90s, the T-14s, the Challengers, we would have seen a significant change in this. Due to drones, due to other weapon systems, the influence of tanks on the front line has decreased dramatically from what they may have been in the beginning of the war and due to previous wars as well. So talking about this depletion of tanks and this and that, or limited amount, is not, I think, it's a big deal, don't get me wrong, but I don't think it's as big as people are saying. Now, if not, Ukraine would be not requesting F-16s and other systems. They would be requesting, we need more Abrams, we need more Challengers, we need more Leopards, we need more old T-series. Now, what he's done is he's gone through all these bases and he's counted up basically what you can see. But what is important in these is there are garages suitable for long-term tank storage, and it's impossible to know what is inside of these. Theoretically, space for 3,000 tanks, but they may hold a lot of other equipment in these as well. So, in conclusion, Russia had at least 7,000 to 7,500 full tank hulls at storage bases, and then units in 21. The physical storage space for 3,000 in garages, but it's probably around under 2,000 due to other equipment being in those. And this guy, a NAFO account here, I actually think he breaks it down well. It's stored outside at 7,500, 1,500 in garage, and 2,000 at units, so 11,000 total of these. Likely 3,500 have been lost. That is off numbers that then the MOD from Britain has given us, about 2,600. This was a few months ago. Other figures put it much higher. So let's go with 3,500 and 1,000 irreparable, 6,500 left. Currently, there's 3,500 in outside storage, a couple of thousand active, and 1,000 still at units. 100 losses a month, 2.5. Then at decent poor condition, 2 years maximum left. But this does not take into account the tempo of the war changing. Doesn't it take into account if there would be ceasefires, and it doesn't take into account if there was ability to purchase from other areas. It also doesn't take into account how much change of tanks having on the front line compared to other systems. Production, people are saying, is about 200 a year, so it best covers a few months. We may see tactics chop and change, though, to do this. It is much easier to fix industrial capacities with your partners and allies and mobilisation of people within your country to work at plants. It's much easier to do that than, as I said earlier in this video, to quote, change the morale and motivation and recruitment of men within your country to go and fight. We have been able to successfully really fit out Ukraine with equipment and everything that fix that issue. The manpower issue is then still ongoing. So let's have a look. Well, let's have a look at this North Korean system that then we have seen here. So this is the image, the Bullseye 4 sitting out here, and this is then one of these we see on parade in the People's Non-Democratic Republic of North Korea. Now let's talk about this. It's a bit of a tow system here. So designed for top attack profiles. This is what a Javelin does. That's why you see a Javelin head up like this. It's the weakest part of armor is on the top. Missiles have an effective range between 10 and 25 kilometers and utilize an electro-optical seeker. That's how a JAV works as well, for guidance combined with command guidance via optical fiber optic cable. So it's towing then a cable here, and you can actually steer it in the air. What this means is it can't be electronic warfare jammed if it's towing something like this, and it can work beyond line of sight. So you don't actually have to see it. You can up and then hit something. It's a derivative of North Korea's 6x6 ABC, which is inspired by, it's basically just a copy of a BTR-80 hull. So we are seeing these, we may see more of it, and everyone took the piss out of North Korean engineers going to help in Russia's war. What I've said is just bodies on the front line, digging holes, digging trenches, vehicles. War of attrition can just be war of who has the most amount of men to buffer something as well. So let's then have a look at the maps, and we'll see where things are then changing. So of course, here is Ukraine, the center, the capital of Kyiv. Red areas since 22, the purple since 2014. The red check is areas of which have moved in the past 24 hours. Eventually, we knew this was going to have to start moving around Robotny here, and we see then there has been a Russian advancement. Now, what we did have, we had geolocated footage right about where my cursor was here yesterday. Over a month ago, we had more footage just about where my cursor is here. So I still believe this is still greatly under what it is in here, and that's of other Ukrainian maps too, but we are starting to see the map eventually move in here. We have an update from Syriac in this direction here as well, but in a different area. And what you can see is how different these maps are looking. So there's main road running through here. This is said main road. So we know there's definitely been some change in here, but the rest is showing very, very different. Importantly, This in here is one of the areas where Ukraine launched its offensive last year. Its costly offensive into here, into the defensive works, and Russia is turning back some of these gains then made, which is why I believe it's very slow to update here or other areas shown from that counteroffensive. Now, we just move east of here. Now, Ulzani-Stamorsky, we then see a Russian advancement here too, in same case of where that offensive made ground. I don't have another map to show this. We move further to the east and we see Krasnoyarivka in here. This is lining up with basically what Syriac showed yesterday of a more northern push in here. Many ask me why I use Syriac, because he more often than not, sometimes he's incorrect like everyone is, more often than not is 24 hours to a week ahead of other maps. Now, Noel Report is also showing very similar update in Krasnoyarivka as well, so we can confirm from 2 Ukrainian sources that Russians made an advancement in here. I can't show this on YouTube. I maybe can because it's Russian, but either way, I won't. You can go to Telegram and watch it, of a Russian advancement here. Armoured assault gets absolutely hammered by drones and artillery in the direction of Krasnoyarivka. What I will say again and again, any advancement anywhere is going to be insanely costly, and the losses incurred are going to be very, very high. People love to point to this, the propaganda, and look how useless. I can't see any other way in a war of attrition like this, on a heavily mined, heavily dug in front line, whether it is Ukraine advancing, whether it is Russia advancing, that you're not going to have huge assaults with massive losses no matter where it is. That is just how I think any movement from here on out is going to look. No change today around Avdiivka. I've got the wrong thing open. But we just have one, sorry, that I've just skipped over, down near Novomyalivka, Konstantinivka. Now, yesterday we did see this confirmation of ground just here as well, an expansion of grey zone. Then Syriac today has this. Now, Syriac does show vastly different. See Pataskovskia, that is by this red dot. This is this reservoir here that he's saying that Russians have broken into Konstantinivka. During the last 48 hours, Russian army restarted the advance to south of Polbita, taking a series of positions along the road towards Konstantinivka. Meanwhile, in this locality, Russian forces managed to capture the first houses southeast of it. So this will be an area just to keep your eyes open and see what shifts or changes in here. But as far as map updates, this is all then we have for the day. Now, I spoke about yesterday, we looked at this satellite imagery here of the claims that a Tu-22 had been damaged, or some had said destroyed. Then we get the before and after, no signs or visible signs of any damage or destruction here. But they by Ukraine has really doubled down on this. That 2 Tu-22 M3 bombers were damaged in the July 25 strike targeting the Olenia airfield in Russia's Murmansk Oblast. This is from Ukrainian military intelligence spokesman Andriy Yisov. He reported that one Russian bomber was damaged. Russian service published on July 30 satellite images show no traces of a Ukrainian strike on the strategic airbase. According to these journalists, Yusov said satellite images are not the only source of information that should be relied on. But again, some point there needs to be some evidence of these claims. Like it or not, there needs to be evidence of it for people to believe it at this point, because both Ukraine and Russia have made so many outlandish claims, especially Ukraine recently with aircraft. It needs to be as clear as day for me to believe anything of that nature at this point. Now, we mentioned people waiting for the F-16s. We have seen some photographs of F-16 decoys being made. Speaking on decoys, there's a lot of argument whether this is or is not a decoy. So this happened at this airbase here. If this looks familiar near Kryvyi Rih, it's because there's been a lot of planes taken out on this airbase. As well, we know that there have been decoys here, but hit by then a Russian Lance. So we see a drone over the top conducting then reconnaissance, and then we see from the loitering then a Lance striking a Su-25. Now, what a lot of people are pointing to is once it's hit, it doesn't break apart like a wood or fiberglass plane would, as well as then these trucks coming to then the aid of the plane burning. Again, makes it seem like it's not a decoy. And many people are pointing at this, and this guy does a good breakdown of it. We're seeing the mock-up chatter. I'd like to clarify some things. Unfortunately, I don't have time to respond to the comments. First of all, consider an aircraft as a mock-up. We have to prove that it was a mock-up and not the other way around. Otherwise, we would have to consider most Russian planes destroyed on the ground as mock-ups too, which would be ridiculous. The video from July 3 shows this, which is thought to be a mock-up, is in a different location to then what was destroyed yesterday. Of course, things can move. But where the mock-up was placed, I'll bring this up, the mock-up was then placed where this red arrow is, which is here, and the one struck was here. So I believe most likely this was then not a decoy by the trucks rushing to its aid, as well as how it has been hit on the ground and not just a complete break apart. But again, that isn't enough to 100% confirm that it wasn't. I'm incredibly critical when it comes to aircraft. I need proper bloody evidence. At this point, I'm sorry, but it is beyond reasonable doubt is needed. Now, the Kiev Independent, they've put this up as well, and I'm not just picking on them. Most mainstream is doing things like this at the moment because of US reports from yesterday. Russia is likely seeking to influence the upcoming US presidential election in favor of Republican nominee Donald Trump. Now, I see that this is just as much propaganda in the other direction, saying that the Russian propagandists, the Russian government, the Russian foreign intelligence services are then doing this to influence Trump for a win, trying to undermine his campaign. Now, I'm not saying that Russia isn't having some influence on elections around the world, like everyone has an influence around elections around the world, but in my eyes, this is just as propagandary for the other side to try and discredit Trump by the mainstream doing this. Then, if RT put something up trying to have a hit piece on Kamala. Now, I spoke at length yesterday. I am not convinced that if Russia is going to put their effort into supporting a candidate to win or to discredit the other one, I am not completely convinced that it is Donald Trump that they want then to win. Trump is a far harder leader and will be far more difficult for, I think, Russia and China's hybrid unconventional warfare campaign around the world. Now, I went into this at length yesterday and I wasn't really happy with how it was. I'll do a specific video then on it. But I think for the war in Ukraine, Trump will come in. The war really has to come to an end. But what Trump has said is he said, if Ukraine don't stop, we'll limit the aid to Ukraine. But if Russia don't stop, we will increase the aid to Ukraine. So it's putting a rock in a hard place. And Russia may go, okay, we want to continue. We've assessed that we can continue, but we won't because we don't want them to get more aid. That Russia may want Kamala to come in, continue the support so they don't have to end the war if their assessment, their military assessment is that they can continue achieving success and have a victory somewhere down the line. They may not want Trump in due to this, but as well, the Chinese and Russian hybrid warfare, propaganda, information campaigns, whatever you want to call it, campaign around the world, a lot of that is pointed towards the global south to increase influence and dominance there. And a lot of that is to try and show that the West is this ultra-liberal left, obsessed with demonic LGBT, sex, this, blah, blah, whatever, which Trump does not embody that. And I actually believe, regardless of what good for the Russian war in Ukraine Trump may do to try and end this, I actually think Trump would have a bigger impact on Russia and China's hybrid campaigns around the world trying to paint the West as an image of that. Trust me, we're painting our own image. They're just tracing it out. The bloody opening ceremony doesn't help, but that's what I think. So I'm not convinced Putin and Xi Jinping, who they actually want to win. The more I think about it, I actually think in this global South influence, I actually think they may want Kamala to win. I think at a process where they're sitting down at a table discussing things, I think Trump is going to be much harder on those other leaders for X due to his business nature. And I think the hybrid, forget Ukraine, the larger hybrid scale, I don't know. I think Kamala might actually be a better candidate if you were Xi Jinping or Putin and what your overall world order sits. Now I sound like I'm pushing an agenda. I'm not a voter. Don't listen to me about American politics or voting. I'm just talking about what I see in this. Now, the last part of which I forgot yesterday was this video put out by the Ukrainian Special Forces around partisan warfare. If you don't know what partisan warfare is, it's basically behind the lines, people recruited to blow up train tracks or blow up energy facilities, and there's a hell of a lot of this, and it's a very broad scope of what it is. Now, I will say, sorry, we'll get to it. I will say, we have not seen anywhere near the amount of partisan warfare that I thought that we would see. If you read anything of the KGB back in the day and where they had caches and this and that, if there was a wider war, they had all this in plan. There wasn't that much of it take place. There was take place in Ukraine, but not as much as we then would have thought. And in occupied territories as well, there has been some, but not to the amount that I thought we would then see. But even if the war falls silent, we will definitely still see partisans in action as well. So, of course, here, symbol of Ukraine, the sunflowers, carrying bolt cutters, like an improvised explosive, blowing up like a train line, which we have seen take place. Photographs of vehicles sending locations. Changing letters back to the Ukrainian spelling of things. Car bombs, which we have seen target a number of people. Of course, normal, average person working as a partisan, but you can see the Ukrainian special forces behind the scenes. So just as much this is to strike fear into the Russians of showing just these average people at the end here, sorry, that it could be anyone. You don't really know. And that's the problem with partisan warfare, is it could be anyone. This is why I have massive doubts that Russia could successfully, for a long time, occupy somewhere like Kharkiv or Kyiv due to the nature of this. And I have doubts as well about Ukraine in somewhere like Sevastopol or Donetsk due to the risk of then partisans. And I have seen theories people point to. This is why, and I don't believe in this, but again, I'll point it out. People have said this is why Russia is advancing very slowly, is they know that they can't occupy this if there's still so many fighting age men willing to fight and willing to do this stuff, that they're holding the line, pushing forward slowly to try and really drain down the motivation and morale. So when they get to these areas, no one can be bothered fighting anymore, and they will more easily take over and occupy. I'm not saying it's true. I'm just saying it's what a lot of people are pointing towards. Legends, I struggled a lot to get this video out today like the other couple of days. I don't know what's wrong with my brain. Maybe my tube has gone splat. Look after yourselves. Have a great day, and I'll speak to you tomorrow. Thank you. Bye-bye.